We were talking a little bit earlier how the topic of banjo is an unusual one in a newsroom, and I think maybe to some people, maybe to many, the banjo is an interesting life choice. Deciding that you're going to play the banjo. When did you start playing, and what sort of drew you to the sound of the banjo?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a choice. It chose me, as I often say. I was brought kicking and screaming to the band. No, no, that's not true. But I just was. I fell in love with it when I was 14 years old, probably 13, when I heard the Kingston Trio, this folk group, during the folk scare of the late 50s and early 60s. But anyway, the Kingston Trio had a song called MTA, and there was a banjo solo on there. And I heard that, and I was already playing folk guitar, but when I heard that banjo solo, I was gone. And I have to play the banjo. And my parents were very, responsive to my needs and got me a long neck Christie banjo for Christmas in '63. Um, and that was it. And I was just off on my banjo journey.
Besides that one record, who are some of your? What I found is that there's sort of a moment when people hear, something and they want to play, like yourself. Maybe it's Chris Bodie hearing Miles Davis or something like that. But then
Right.
there's also people who, you get that inspiration and then you keep drawing influences from. Who are some banjo players that you were listening to that kept you inspired and helped you cultivate your sound, maybe then and maybe now?
Well, this gentleman right here, so we don't have too much.
It's
That's
perfect.
Earl Scruggs as a young man. And he's still, I mean, he was, once I heard the banjo player Dave Gard with the Kingston Trio, I thought, where else do I go? Who else does this? A guy named Earl Scruggs. Oh, okay. Checked out Flatt and Scruggs, and I just fell in love with his music, and am even more in love with his music now. 58 or 59 years later, I got a hold of these jam session recordings of jam sessions I did with John Hartford in the late '80s, I'm sorry, no, late '90s, 1990s, and playing tunes that he never recorded, and just doing all this amazing, interesting stuff. So I'm just last night I couldn't go to bed. I was so excited about discovering this Earl thing on one of these jams, and I'm serious about that. So I'm even more in love with Earl Scruggs' music than I have been in the past, which is hard to believe for me, but that's the way it is. Anyway, he was a huge influence. Another guy named Bill Keith, who invented a whole other way of playing the banjo, which allowed you to play fiddle tunes note for note. It was based on melodies. He invented what we today call the melodic style, as opposed to Scruggs style, which has melody notes in amongst the chords, which are broken up. Not to get too geeky and technical about the whole thing. I would say those are my two main influences on the banjo, but there are others as well. But we don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole.
And then so I do happen to know this because I am also a music guy, but it's Scruggs style, melodic style, and I'm blanking on sort of the modern two finger flat picking sort
It's
of.
called it's called
That's it.
single
Yeah.
string style, which is actually not that modern. It's modern. We think of it that way because Bela Fleck is the one who really took it to the moon.
Mhm.
Before he was doing it, people were playing more out of positions, but he, across the well here
Yeah, there we go.
across the fingerboard this way, and Bela
Yeah.
allowed you to opened up the fingerboard. People just hadn't thought to do that until he came along, or maybe they did, but they didn't really explore it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that style goes back in bluegrass into the 1950s. But yeah, but Bela took it to the moon. So yeah.
So then, how would you describe your style at this point? Do you still sort of evolve? I mean, you love those great Scruggs recordings that has such a fantastic, like, this is what the banjo is supposed to sound like kind of feel. How
Right.
would you just describe your sound, your style, and maybe where you're looking to take it next?
Huh. Good question. I have a hard time describing my own style. It's not like Scruggs style has these particular licks and a particular sound, melodic style. All of these have a very particular thing about them. What I've come up with, which a lot of which I started developing in the, I guess, late '60s, early '70s, um, just kind of, well, okay, here's a
Yeah.
banjo. Surprise. Here it is again. I mean, one aspect is I like to go kind of chromatic. That sort of thing, moving around the neck, one fret at a time, going chromatically, that sort of thing. Or sometimes using the interval of the sixth. This is turning into a banjo lesson. Anyway, but rather than just doing that, having one finger go down at a time. Things like that. I mean, these are just various ideas I came up with, and there are others. So again, it'd be getting a little geeky, but it's a lot of it is improvisatory ideas that you can expand upon and go off in all different directions. So I have a number of those things that I developed. And I guess another aspect is on my first album, Bluegrass Light, that came out in 1974, I recorded it in 73. And I just started writing these tunes that were in different time signatures. Instead of 4/4 or 2/4, I wrote a tune in 7/4. I was living in New York City, and I was listening to a lot of jazz. I saw Charles Mingus, Ornette Coleman, on and on, just the pantheon of jazz folks who were still alive at that point, Miles Davis. And so I was listening to a lot of jazz, and so some of that influence got in there. I'm not a jazz player, and I started working up some Charlie Parker solos note for note, like in the early 70s. But I never fully developed that because I don't know, for some reason, as much as I would love to have, and sort of wish I had, and it's not too late, but it didn't speak to me as much as other things did. It wasn't an extension of my musical personality enough to really get into that. But anyway, it influenced my composing because I was listening to a lot of fusion music that was happening at that point, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Weather Report, Chick Corea, and Return to Forever. And so I just sort of filtered that through my own sensibilities and came up with tunes that had strange chords for bluegrass, for sure, and some odd time signatures, like I say. And I started recording not just with a bluegrass organization, not with a bluegrass band, fiddle, banjo, guitar, mandolin, etc. But I had a band I was playing with, an electric band. And I have one song on my first album with double bass drums, bass clarinet, electric guitar, and I'd record later on with saxophone. And I was living when I moved to New York City from Syracuse, which is where I'm from originally. I ended up playing with people that were like-minded like me and trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit. And some weird stuff came out of that.
That's fantastic. Well, you said earlier this is turning into a banjo lesson. That is why you're coming to Rochester. So you're doing this workshop at Bernunzio Uptown Music. Talk to me about what this workshop is. What are some lessons, key concepts you want to get across, and what do you want people to take away from the lesson, from the workshop?
I just want to open up people's technique and their minds to different ideas. But when you do a workshop like this, like it's going to be a 3-hour workshop, and I don't know who's going to be there. There'll be people that are absolute beginners, and there'll be people that might be certainly intermediate, maybe advanced. And so I try to cover a lot of different bases. So I spend a little bit of time on basic ideas, how to get a professional sound, that sort of thing. But some ideas that can apply to intermediate and advanced players as well. I would do a deep dive into Scruggs. I call it Earl's Pearls, these ideas that he came up with that are not in his book, that are maybe a little bit deeper because there's a lot of information out there already. And I do a thing on the history of the melodic style, this Bill Keith style that I was talking about, and then how to develop solos and how to improvise. Because these are things, you can hand someone a piece of music, banjo tablature is what we call it, and then they can look at that. And there's tons of that out there. I've written a whole bunch of books, and I've got this online banjo school, and lots of people have stuff out there, but trying to do stuff that people can work on and develop their own ideas. So that's another aspect of it. Trying to cram this all into 3 hours, but and I'm open to what people want to talk to too. I'll say, hey, what would you like me to cover? And then, I've got a lot of music with me and sheets to hand out, but I'll go off in other directions too, as as the vibe allows, as it were.
I mean, what do you enjoy about teaching? I mean, someone of your caliber does not have to do that if they don't want to. You could have a life on the road. You could be performing all the time. Why do you love teaching?
I like doing both teaching and I love being on the road also and performing. Um, I think it's in my gene pool for one thing. My father was a physics professor at Syracuse University, so it's partly the gene pool thing. And um, I learn a lot from teaching too because I get bored easily, so I'm constantly doing different musical things, in terms of performing, but also teaching. I always try to come up with something new. Uh, and again, I have this online banjo school, and so I have to keep putting up new material there, and I learn new things. I'll work up a new Earl Scruggs tune, or I'll develop a new technique, and in the process, I learn a lot for myself,
Mhm.
and I enjoy sharing the information. I mean, I'm passionate about the banjo, needless to say, and so it gives me an opportunity to share stories and information that I've had through all these years. Um, and just as one thing I'm really excited about, besides doing the Christmas show coming up, but I'm doing an Earl Scruggs retrospective deep dive show where I trace his career from his very first when he was 10 years old, working up the three finger style, and going all the way through till the end of his career and everything in between, playing with Lester Flatt and with Bill Monroe and all of this and it's a 2 set night or an hour and a half show straight through, and I've done a couple of them. We just did one up in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and I've got a great band, and that's my main thing I'm really excited about right now. So anyway,
From Syracuse originally, you come back to Rochester for these workshops. What do you like about coming back to Rochester and Bernunzio's to do these kind of workshops?
well, I love Bernunzio's and John and Ryan there, great folks, and it's just a very welcoming environment, and there are all these instruments lying around there that banjos and guitars and mandolins and so on and so forth. And it's just a really comfortable environment, and I just love coming to Rochester because it's upstate New York, and I'm from Syracuse, and there used to be a guy named Eldon Stutzman who worked in Rochester, and in his basement back in the later '60s and early '70s, we would go over there, and there were these really valuable instruments that were very cheap at the time, and now would cost $100,000, and he just had them in his basement. And so I have fond memories of that. And we also had a chance to have dinner with Bill Monroe in Rochester in 1966. He came to our guitar player's parents' house because they lived in Rochester, and we got to hang out with Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, play with Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass,
Mhm.
and have dinner with him. And then afterwards, sitting on the living room couch in Rochester, Bill Monroe said, "Would you like us to play for you?" And so Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, and a great band at that point, took requests for about 20 minutes, and then we got to ride in the Bluegrass bus over to the gig at the University of Rochester. So I have very fond memories of Rochester.
Oh man, to be a fly to be at that gig, that to
Oh,
not well the gig before the gig. I mean,
yeah,
University of
it
Rochester
was.
is cool and all, but
That's what it was. Yeah.
uh, that's actually an interesting segue because the one thing I always like asking artists of your caliber. I mean, what do you think about some of these new artists today? This made me think of it because Billy Strings got famous because of his own couch concert, as it were. But I mean, what do you think about some of these fantastic bluegrass new artists that are out there? Billy plays fantastic banjo. His banjo player Billy plays
His
plays
banjo player, yeah.
yeah, is also named Billy. No, Pikelny's still playing out there. I mean, what do you think about this new crop of bluegrass players and this sort of revived interest in bluegrass? What are your thoughts on that and these new players out there right now?
It's amazing. It's wonderful. There's Molly Tuttle,
Mhm.
who I have this Christmas show I do every year, and I'm doing it this year also. And she was in my Christmas show, and she was kind of a quiet, laid back, amazing musician, but very laid back. And now she's Molly Tuttle. It's amazing to see her development. And Billy Strings, of course, I've had a chance to sit in with him a couple of times at the Capitol Theater north of New York City, and he'll get, I don't know, 6,000 people in there or something. He's doing the Nassau Coliseum uh, later this month, or in November, I guess. And it's amazing. He's just reaching all these people, and he's the real deal. He can play Little Maggie and just sound like totally bluegrass, or he stretches out, and he's got a light show, and he's charismatic, and he moves around the stage. So, but he's the real deal. He's a great, great guitar player. He's on Bela Fleck's most recent album, My Bluegrass Heart. So that says a lot right there. It's not just because he's Billy Strings; he can really deliver. There's a group called Mile 12, made up of young folks from the Berklee College of Music. I've worked with some of them over the years, and so there's a great scene. And in fact, I'm doing it's called the Banjo Gathering next weekend in Baltimore, and we're doing a show that I'll be hosting, basically, of various styles of banjo, an African musician playing a kora and four-string banjo, but there's a young gentleman named Nikolai Margolis who is playing like Bela stuff. He's an amazing player. He's doing jazz things on the banjo at the age of 15, and he's going to be there. And there's another guy who was at Bela Fleck has a banjo camp every year. That's where I first met Nikolai. And there's another kid who was 12 years old and went on stage in front of 2,000 people and played turn of the century banjo style. So banjo and bluegrass is in very good hands these days. We'll just say that.
Awesome. Tony, is there anything I didn't ask about that you would like to add ahead of, about anything at all, or coming up on this lesson?
Well, the world situation. No, never mind.
You got me. That was close.
You opened the door. So no, that's great. I'm really looking forward to the workshop, and that's it. So yeah, I'm going to be doing a workshop tomorrow night in West Falls, New York, near Buffalo. So I'm workshopping out and doing gigs too. So anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity.
I hope this isn't too much of an imposition, but would you mind playing us out? Maybe a little 30 seconds or something. You got that in you?
Let me just get my finger picks on here. Yeah, I do have the banjo in my hands. I guess it would make some sense.
I didn't want to push it too much, but
no, that's all right.
Since it was there.
Since they're here, let me just get this down here.
So yeah, that's it.
Review.